Hey everybody, and welcome back to the next part in my dialing in series for our Line 6 Helix. I had a few requests over, not just the recent past, over quite a while now, to do Paul Gilbert style tone. I had some people ask for green tinted 60s Mind Type, some other from, or the first album, just the self-titled Mr. Big album. So that was kind of always a favorite of mine. So I kind of did a tone here that was going to be more kind of to cover that album, and I'm going to show you a little twist we can make on it too to kind of do like the second album, like Green Tinted 60s Mind and that type of a thing as well. That seems to work. Again, standard disclaimer, this is not, I'm not stating that this is an exact replica or anything of that sort. It's just in that ballpark, and it seemed to work really good. I have a performance video up. I just picked one of the tunes that I always kind of liked off of the first album, which was Take a Walk. I don't know if you remember that. That riff there, I just remember when I got that album, I was like, wow. I was a huge Racer X fan before, and then this album was so different with Billy Sheehan. It was just such a cool album. But anyway, so I did the intro and I did the guitar solo. With that, I used Superior Drummer 3 for drums and Moto Bass by IK Multimedia, which is a synth bass, but not, well, it's a modeled bass. It's always tough to program anything that sounds, is going to sound anything like Billy playing, right? But the funny thing is I ran it through the model on Helix Native of Billy's Pierce bass preamp. So it was kind of cool, but anyways, it doesn't sound anything like Billy. Anyways, let's dive over to HX and take a look at what I did for this tone. What I decided to do amp-wise is go with the Line 6 2204 mod, get that kind of modded Marshall 80s type of thing going on. Okay, so let's start at the end of the chain again. Standard for what I do, and anybody's watched my videos, LA Studio comp with the peak reduction to 6, slightly higher. I've been doing that a little more with certain things to let it just kind of sit in the mix a little bit better. EQ, this is pretty, you know what, let's actually leave that. We'll come back to that. Verb, I went with a plate, and I went between keeping this on and off, and I kept kind of flipping back and forth, but ultimately I ended up with it on. A decay of 3.3, pre-delay of 15 milliseconds, mix of 30%. I also did something with the delay that's not quite normal. You can tell there's not a lot of like heavy repeated delays in Paul's tone. It's kind of in your face and cuts. So I went with a simple delay set at a 16th note, almost like a slapback type of an effect, with feedback at 0% and mix at 20%. Pretty subtle, but it just gave a little bit of a nice processed sound to it. One of the real secrets to what's going on here is he always has some sort of modulation effect, it seems, on that album, on his rhythm tones, his lead tones. I don't know about every tone, but it seems like most of them do. So I know Paul's known for using a flanger and a chorus. I went with the flanger as it kind of got closer to me. And again, this isn't an exact replica of what he had going on, but I went with, I set the tempo up here at 92 because that's the tempo of that song, roughly, give or take, a couple beats per minute. Note sync, I just set at a half note. Width at 5, manual at 5, regen at 0, and mix at 50%. So that got me kind of what I was happy with, and it sat in the mix nicely. So let's take a look at what I did with the amp here. Drive was at 7.2, bass at 3.5, mid at 5.1, treble and presence up to 10. There's a real bite to this tone. And since I went with a ribbon mic, as you'll see over here, let's look at the cab. I went with the 412 Greenback 25 ribbon mic, 121 ribbon at 4.5 inches. I really had to dial that bite, and I could have just gone with a 57, and got some of that upper end sizzle to it, if you know what I mean. But I really love the ribbon mics. I like what the bottom end does. It always stays nice and warm. I'm a real big fan of that, as anybody knows who's watched my videos. So I compensate by really cranking the treble, and you're going to see how else I deal with that with a split crossover in the EQ in a minute. So yeah, treble and presence at 10, channel volume at 8.5, master at 5. Didn't touch any of the deeper functions down here. I already talked about the cab, but now over to the split crossover. I set that at 1 kilohertz, and the reason I did that is all the frequencies below that I left alone. All the frequencies above that, I really jacked right up to 12 dB. So a real major sizzle in there. And you can kind of hear, listen to the tone with that off. Very dark. Put that on. and you get that sizzle and that bite that you want, right? So that was a big part of the tone, and I'll come back and talk about that again in a second. But if we go down to the EQ, what I did is at 180 hertz, Q of 3.2, I just pulled out a little bit of 1.5 dB, minus 1.5 dB. At 8.5 kilohertz though, high Q of 3.4, the Q of 3.4 on that, I put that up another 12 dB. My low cut was at 50 to sort of retain some real bottom in there on that chugging kind of, right? The high cut was at 13.5 kilohertz, so I didn't want to cut too much of that sizzle out of it as well. So if we shut that off and shut the split crossover off, here's what the tone sounded like. Really not great. I mean, it's very muddy and boomy, and that has a lot to do with the 121 ribbon. Now, if I put that to a 57, it's a little more, but it still doesn't give me the bite I need, right? So that's why I kind of just went with the 121 ribbon, left that alone, came in here, added this EQ. Here it is. And then the split cross is what's really making the difference here. Right? You can watch me do that whole solo in the performance video. Please go watch that. I'll put a link in the description to that. Now, a lot of people might say, okay, well, that's a little bit too much going on the split cross, or maybe it's too piercing or too bright. The beauty of this is, as we dial it back even a dB, it changes, right? You can hear how much darker that is. But, you know, I would say if you don't like it up 12 dB, you could go 10 dB. You know, 9, depending on your pickups, depending on your monitoring system. You know, that's a little more punch in the bottom and a little less cut up top, but up 12 dB. It really bites and cuts. Now, this is interesting because with this tone, I thought, I wonder what would happen if we just dial that back and use it for something off of the second album. I found Paul's tone, and maybe this is just to my ears, maybe I'm wrong about this, but on something like Green Tinted 60s Mind intro, it doesn't have that bite or that cut. It seems to be a little bit smoother. So something like this. To me, cuts too much. So I found that if I pull that back to around 8 on the split crossover, right, we can get that kind of tone. I didn't really compare it to that, but it seems to work for me and sounds good. He still has that flange thing going on, and it just seemed to work nicely. But for this first album's tone, it seems to work nice. So what do you think, guys? I hope you guys liked that tone. It was a lot of fun to mess with, and it's always been one of my favorites. I love Paul's playing back from Racer X through Mr. Big. It's such a great player. I love Billy Sheehan's playing. I know he's part of, you know, the Line 6 forum and uses the Helix as well. So anyways, I'll have that up on CustomTone, and like I said, you guys can adjust it to your taste, get it sounding good for your guitar and your system, and hopefully you guys can find it useful. I think it's going to be good just for a good sort of run-of-the-mill 80s style tone too, you know, you could use for a lot of different songs, not just Mr. Big or Paul Gilbert stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like the video and share it if you don't mind. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll be back soon with a lot more content. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and ciao for now.